Hello everybody. I wanted to make a video that's a little bit different, or quite a bit different than any video that I've really ever made. So I'm experimenting with the whole video capture stuff on OBS. And I wanted to respond to a conversation that Lauren Southern and BASSFZz, who basically he usually refers to himself as Zerse, so I'm mostly going to call him Zerse throughout this video because that's a lot easier to say. I just wanted to give a response to some of the stuff that they recently talked about with the Manosphere slash men's community. And I'm actually going to start off on this just for context. Right after they talked about a clip with Undead Chronic, where Undead Chronic was basically criticizing Lauren for some of the statements that she had made about, people, men especially, giving up on society and actually wanting society to fail and all that kind of thing. And although I've made videos on that before, I'm really not focused on that so much here as much as the comments that they made about the men's community. So I'm going to go ahead and play this. I may end up making a 2-part or even 3-part video because I don't know how long this is going to take. I ramble a lot, but at the same time, I'm only going to cover about 10 minutes of their conversation. So it may turn out to be really long and I may split it into 2 or even into 3. We'll just see how this goes. But again, this is basically a response to the whole idea of, you'll see what they're talking about, but the manosphere and men sort of walking away from the system and how that's supposedly wrong and all that. And I just want to mention also that, I actually like Zerse. Like, I've watched his content for a long time, since the whole Emma Watson he for she stuff, so I don't really have a negative opinion on him. I actually think he's a pretty good guy, just from what I've seen. Some people may not agree with that, but I definitely disagree with the points that he makes here. And with Lauren, I don't have anything against her. I used to be subscribed to her old channel before she went and made her documentary stuff, but, lately I haven't watched any of her stuff, and I'm going to get more into sort of my thoughts about, what I see going on here. But let's just start the clip and see what they have to say.
Because recently, I've been talking about like incels and trying to help out young men kind of come back and recognize just how beautiful being a man is. Like, because being a
Yeah.
man, a lot of people don't recognize this, but men have a very strong capacity to love women and love people. That's very selfless.
Yeah, that's true, but the problem is that people also do things based on either incentive or perceived incentive, right? So people don't do things because you think that they should. People do things because in some form or fashion there's a benefit or a positive experience that's possible along with that. And so men may definitely have the capacity to do things for others, but when they're essentially punished for that, they're going to learn pretty quickly. And men also have a pretty great capacity for reason. Men have the capacity to actually think about, well, wait a second, if this is going to be the consequence here, I'm just not going to do that. And so you see more and more often where women will get attacked on the subway or by some sort of wild animal, and men are just like, no, you're strong and independent, you can handle it yourself, because men have realized that there's a good chance that they're going to be implicated for doing something wrong if they actually step in and try to help that person, right? They realize that they're probably not going to be appreciated, and they may actually be punished for, acting on their capacity to do good for others and to be selfless. So, right away, I think this is a minor point to make, not something that's really a major theme that I want to discuss in this response, but people do things based on either incentive or perceived incentive. And this idea that men have the capacity to do good, well, it kind of relies on the environment as well. And I'm sure that that's something that Zerse is aware of, but it has to be said, I think, because as soon as you have a system where men are encouraged not to act on that capacity, then that's what you're going to see in a lot of cases. And that's going to continue to become the case more and more often if men are essentially punished for acting on that.
And it's very, very driven by what we can do for them, right? A lot of people just have totally missed on just how incredible being a man is. So that's one thing I've been trying to
Mhm.
focus on a lot more often on my channel, right?
That's
And
good.
so the one thing that I was I wanted to kind of talk to you about this a little bit is like, have you also you clearly noticed it, right? Like how terrible do you think it would be for society to continue to see this mindset foster? I wonder if you like have some more
Which
thoughts on that.
mindset do you mean? Like people
This
being
the mindset
bitter
of
with?
men not wanting to, yeah, bitter, not wanting to fight for their country, or not wanting to fight for each other. You know, the
Again, this sort of idea or understanding of incentive, or at least perceived incentive, if your country no longer has your interests in mind, or if there's nothing positive that's going to be created out of you going off and doing something for other people, then you're going to learn fairly quickly to wait a second, I still want to be a good guy, and go through this mental process of I still may want to do right by other people, the people that are worth caring about, but everybody else can go F themselves. Right? Why wouldn't you have that response? And I'm not even saying that Lauren and Zerse actually disagree with that, but this is only something that's valid if the society that men live in actually gives some sort of positive recognition for this. If the country that you live in just wants you to go die so that the elites can gain something at your expense, then why would you want to fight for your country in some war over, whether it's oil or whether it's supposedly spreading democracy somewhere else or whatever their justification is, right? It's an individual basis thing, right? If the people that you care about are actually going to be attacked because someone's sending an army over and landing them in the United States or Canada or wherever, then that would be different. But if it's something that really doesn't concern you as an individual man or the people that you love and care about, it's just pretty much something that's driven by the political class, or it's something that actually you don't believe in or are against because you're just trying to basically help the United States federal government more or less get its way, then why would you want to be a part of that? But again, that's not necessarily directly speaking against what Lauren and Zerse are saying here. It's just clearly a lot of the cases today involve something that's not really in your interest or perceived interest. By the way, really to be quick about describing this, to sort of briefly state it, what I mean by perceived incentive is something like guys thinking with their dicks, right? We'll get into that more later, but a perceived incentive is basically you think it's positive to try to be with a woman because you want to have sex with her, but then you realize that that just gets you in trouble, or women don't necessarily care about the effort that you put into that, right? Like you learn that, wait a second, if I can control my biology and essentially not think with my little head, it becomes clear that maybe women really don't offer a whole lot that's positive, and maybe I don't need to try to build a life with a woman, and maybe I am better off not dealing with most of the women around me. Even if I find them sexually attractive, so what? That doesn't lead to anything that's really positive for me. Some guys get there and some guys don't. But again, I want to get more into the main points that I want to make with this response.
the mindset that people will throw their hands up and say, "Nah, I don't care. I don't want to fight. I don't want to help people," or "No, it's not my problem." Like that type of mindset of like honestly
Yeah.
kind of being like defeated and like giving up and just letting society burn.
Yeah, I think.
Well, the thing about that is, again, you have to actually have something at stake that's positive for you. And just from the societal, let it burn or not sort of point of view, the sort of other question to ask here is, all right, you have people that you love and care about. It's not just necessarily about you, right? You're trying to be a good person and you do care about other people, but how does the society that you live in affect them? Is it really a positive, beneficial thing for your friends and loved ones, or is that society basically oppressing them or hurting them in some way? And that's a question that I don't necessarily think we have a clear answer to. Another point is that there's a major difference between just stepping aside and letting things fall apart versus actively wanting to hurt other people, right? At what point, in other words, does society, any society, deserve to die? And are we at that point in Western society? I would think that you could actually make a case that we're beyond that point, right? Other than, again, if an army's actually coming in to hurt your loved ones and actually, coming into Ohio and hurting the people that I actually care about, or, there's there's people in other states and other areas of the world that I've come to know, like on YouTube, that I care about as well. But again, it comes down to, are the people that you actually love and care about benefiting from society, or is society basically hurting them? And yes, if society would collapse, a lot of people are going to die. I understand that. That's not a good thing, but that doesn't really justify society's continuance, right? It doesn't necessarily mean that society deserves to continue the way that it is, or to continue to, become more and more decadent or more and more corrupted, so that people that actually are good people are being punished and bad people, evil people, are being rewarded. If you have a society that's corrupt enough or evil enough, then it deserves to die, even if that means that when it collapses, that a lot of the people that you care about may end up even getting killed. At what point are those people being oppressed indefinitely, or those people, being harmed, even if society itself isn't in a state of collapse? At what point is it not worth it to keep that going? You have to kind of ask these questions, because I do think there's a point where eventually there's no reason to keep such a society going. But again, I want to focus more on the men and women's issues, or the overall statements that Lauren and Zerse make about the manosphere here. So let's move on.
I think it's horrendous. I think the people who are doing what this guy does, and some of these, I don't want to say all of them, because there are good men's rights activists, obviously, but there's some MRAs or MGTOW or whatever you call them that
Yeah, she's talking about Undead Chronic here. And again, I really didn't want to feel a need to address Chronic's video itself. I kind of wanted to talk about the aftermath, so that's why I started that after they played this clip. But again, let's see what she has to say about it.
I think are making it worse for men, in that you've already got society telling men, you are worthless, don't stand up for yourself, you're pathetic, masculinity is evil, this, that, and the other. And a lot of these, too many of these creators allow men to just accept that toxic mindset and say, yep, you know what, if the world is going to be horrible and feminist, well, we're just going to hate women too. Let's just become as hateful as these people. Let's not try to...
Right. Automatically, the assumption is that Undead Chronic and a lot of the MRAs and MGTOW guys just hate women, right? And I'm going to go more into why they make that assumption, because they make it clear sort of what the basis of their argument is. And I'm not sure whether everyone can see that right off the bat, but it is kind of convoluted. But right away, right, it's men must think that women are evil if they have this sort of response of being, against women's rights, or against, getting together with women in relationships. And they're going to mention all of these kinds of things more specifically, but right away it must be that these kinds of men are evil. Don't ask Undead Chronic why it is that he feels the way that he does. And yeah, he's calling Lauren a thought and all that kind of stuff, which generally speaking is not the kind of stuff that I get into on my channel. So, I think it's a waste of time to try to get into those conversations with people. But overall, again, just automatically assume that he thinks women are evil, because that's kind of the position she has to have. And Zerse does seem to go along with this for their greater sort of argument that they make. So let's see what that is here, or we'll eventually get to that.
Win things back. Let's not try to better ourselves. Just stay in this cycle of bitterness and watch our videos over and over and over again. And I get it. Like when...
That's another motivation for me wanting to make this response, is sort of a continuation of a video I made about anti-MGTOW arguments, right? A lot of them just say, MGTOW guys are all bitter and they hate women. Again, I've already sort of responded to that criticism in the past, but I want to go into, again, the specifics of why they're saying, why I believe they're saying what they are talking about in this particular video. Why it is that Lauren kind of has to make the case that these guys all think that women are evil and so forth.
When women or men have had bad experiences with the other sex, what they do is they retreat into their own gendered circles, which completely makes sense. And then they go and they speak to people who have had similar experiences so they don't feel alone. But the tragic thing that happens is there are good men that have had good experiences with women, and there are good women.
Are there? Really? That's interesting. I'm not saying they don't exist. Of course they exist in some number. But a lot of the guys that I see that are even married and had supposedly nominally successful relationships are pretty much whipped. They pretty much have a happy wife, happy life, yes dear sort of attitude toward everything. And I'm going to get into why that is as well. It kind of all falls into one main issue that Lauren and Zerse don't want to acknowledge, and instead choose to label MRAs and MGTOW basically as evil, or I'm sorry, as thinking that women are evil, or blaming all their problems on women. But again, let's get into sort of more of what they have to talk about, more of the whole, it's the same on both sides type of stuff.
That have had good experiences with men, but they're not the ones that are going to be retreating into these circles. So the people who retreat into these circles, whether they be hyper-feminist or MGTOW, are all people who have had really off...
Hyper-feminist or MGTOW, right? So again, the idea is that third and fourth wave feminism is comparable to MGTOW. Now, of course, she's not talking about your less radical feminists, because apparently they're better than MGTOW. They're not as extreme. Right? They have more of a valid reason for believing the way they do, I guess, compared to MGTOW just walking away from the whole thing. But again, this comparison that it's the same on both sides, right? Men who are just hating on women or blame women for all their problems, as she'll get into here in just a minute, I think, are the same as the women who are feminists and who think they live in a patriarchy and blame all their problems on men and hate men. It's the same on both sides. Why? Well, the assumption pretty much is that we live in a neutral environment, right? We live in an environment where men and women could effectively get together and could be in successful relationships, right? She's talking about men have been with women, women have been with men in successful relationships. So we have a balanced playing field is basically the assumption she's making, that essentially it's just these problematic people who are entitled on both sides. Right, that's the case that she's making.
Evil experiences with the other sex, so all they do is reinforce to each other repeatedly, well, oh, I'm not crazy, everyone else has had these awful experiences, and it's everyone I'm around talking to constantly, well, all women must be evil, all men must be evil, look at these other stories. But it's just a feedback loop of negativity.
Right, so in other words, it's a bias sample is what she's saying, right? The guys that are introduced to whatever content in the Manosphere have all had bad experiences, and they share those experiences with other men. The feminist women have had bad experiences with men, and they share, supposedly, according to conceptually what she's setting up here, right? They've had bad experiences with men, and so they also feed into that man-hating type of stuff, right? Where yeah, we all have had these bad experiences with men, therefore men are all shitty. So again, it's the same on both sides is what she's trying to say. That's the framework. That's the overall kind of theory, or those are the concepts that she's using, right? It's the men on one side and the women on the other side that are entitled and just have these negative experiences, and they can't get out of that because they hear about these negative experiences from like-minded people or people who have been through similar experiences. And so again, it's the same on both sides, and theoretically that could be true, right? It could be that we have a neutral level playing field and it's just entitled people on both sides, right? Now I'm going to get into tearing that apart here later, but that's the general sort of framework. I think that's a fair way of representing what she's saying, and Zerse sort of does seem to go along with this, as we'll listen to. But that seems to be the idea, right? It's the same on both sides. Men and women could get along and have healthy relationships. They do, in fact, but because you have all these people on the internet basically as outliers, it didn't have to be on the internet, but right, you have your feminist circles and your men's issues / MGTOW, MRA circles. Those are the men that are often the problem, right? And it's the feminist women that are often the problem. And really, we should just be able to get along, right? That conceptually, that could be the way things actually are, but it's not. And I'm going to go into that here in a minute.
And all of them have had failed relationships, obviously. So then they're all giving each other the advice of people who have failed. So none of them are getting good advice. They're all getting advice from people who are also down in the dumps. And none of them are getting any sort of, light from the people outside this cave.
Now, let's see. I wonder if someone could talk about some of the specific problems or issues that men have in relationships today. Could there be certain particular problems that men have that might be maybe not, we can't just say right off the bat justification for not dealing with any women, but just let's look at some of the specific problems that men actually have. I wonder if there's anybody from the past that could actually explain to us what some of the reasons men have for thinking this way could be, regardless of whether it's fully justified or not, regardless of whether you want to say that this isn't a good enough reason to just walk away from women. I wonder what some of those reasons could be. Maybe we can figure out how we can find that information. Maybe there's someone that can help us out with that.
Hello, my name is Lauren. A few years ago, I uploaded this photo of myself holding a sign saying, "I don't need feminism because I believe in equality, not entitlements and supremacy." To my surprise, the photo was shared all over the internet, from BuzzFeed and even on Time magazine. I got a lot of support for the photo, but I also got a lot of hate and criticism. Most of that criticism from feminists who claimed I did not know what the word feminism means because feminism is actually a movement for equality. So today I wanted to speak to those feminists and explain why I'm still not a feminist and why third wave feminism is not in fact a movement for equality. I want to start by asking a question. If feminism is a movement for equality, why do we not see equal representation of both genders' issues? And why do we not see feminists complaining about benefits that women have over men in certain situations? I bet very few people watching this video right now know that around 100,000 to 140,000 males are raped annually in US prisons. This is more males raped than females in the US annually, yet feminists remain silent on the issue. Almost half the domestic abuse victims in the US and Canada are men. Yet there are no safe houses for them, no court advocacy programs, no subsidized counseling or legal care like women. Despite being half the victims, they are basically ignored. Men make up 80% of suicide victims, 92% of workplace deaths, 97% of combat deaths, and 77% of homicide victims. Men are objectified, men are raped, men are mistreated. Men are held to ridiculously high societal standards, just like women. Yet feminists continue to place this blanket judgment over all men that they are all privileged, and all women that they are all oppressed. Yet, as a woman, I will almost always win custody of children in a divorce case. I will receive less than half the sentence a man does for the exact same crime, and actually have my rape and assault accusations taken seriously, and I won't be laughed at for not being manly enough. With one quick Google search, I can find a safe house in my area if I have been in an abusive relationship. As a woman, I am more likely to get a government or military job, despite qualifications, just to fill a quota due to affirmative action. And I am also more likely to get into a university because of my gender. So if feminism really were a movement for equality, you would see feminists rioting about the 140,000 men raped. You would see them questioning the fact that women get less than half the prison sentence a man does for the exact same crime. Yet, we do not see equal representation of men's and women's issues. Despite popular belief, feminism is not, in fact, a synonym for equality. I'm not trying to say that men have more issues than women. My point is that both genders have issues.
So, I want to make a few things known, like I want to set a few things out there as caveats to showing that clip of Lauren, teenage Lauren from years ago, talking about why she's anti-feminist. One, not all the issues that she talks about are directly women's fault, right? If a man becomes homeless, that could be for a variety of reasons, right? He could have a drug problem. He could, have just made poor life decisions, right? Maybe he doesn't want to work. There's a variety of reasons, or maybe he's just really unfortunate. In a lot of cases, though, having bad experiences with women are at least part of why a guy ends up in that situation, so they could be related. But I'm not saying that every single thing that Lauren mentions there is directly the fault of a woman or women in general. Although you could, again, make the case that if we didn't have all these welfare programs designed primarily to help women, that some of these men might get help and might not become homeless. Another point that I want to make is that I'm not saying that this is a gotcha moment, right? I'm not saying that Lauren is contradicting herself. She actually seems to be consistent here. She's just consistently wrong. Because she says that, well, men have all these problems, right? Men are getting no help in domestic violence situations. Men are far more likely to suffer the consequences of, not getting child custody, right? In other words, they have to pay most of the child support. And I'm going to mention other facts in here that Lauren may not have mentioned specifically in that video. But, all these things that at least allow Lauren, and I would argue that Zerse knows this as well, to realize that, you know what? We don't live in a society where men have it easy. We don't live in a society where men's issues are taken seriously, right? Lauren knows these specific problems. Like, she admits here that men have these specific issues that are not being addressed through feminism. Now, a third caveat, the last caveat I want to make about that clip, that last comment really, is that I don't think Lauren has ever really given a shit about men. And I'm not saying that as like, oh, Lauren's really this bad person. That's actually not what I'm saying. What I mean is that there is a difference between a woman that is anti-feminist and a woman that actually cares about men's issues. And I even see guys who are basically red-pilled, so to speak, guys in the manosphere who don't seem to realize that, right? What'll happen is a woman will say she's anti-feminist, and then they assume that she cares about men and men's problems. And yes, Lauren does talk about men's problems here, but she immediately dismisses them. In my view, she dismisses those problems by saying, well, women have just as many issues, right? You notice that at the end of that clip that was from, I think, when she was with Rebel Media about, men's problems. I'm not saying that those problems are worse than what women have. Okay. So you're basically just, in a single statement, dismissing everything you've just mentioned about men's problems, and I'm going to get into that. But she does seem to at least be saying, I am anti-feminist, but she's not saying that she actually wants to advocate for men's problems. She's just pointing out feminist hypocrisy. She's just saying feminism's not about gender equality. And you have, and this is a point that I think should be made, you have a variety of reasons why women might be anti-feminist. A woman may be anti-feminist because she realizes that feminism relies on the welfare state and she has a high-paying job and doesn't want to pay a huge amount in taxes. She's totally anti-feminist. She's not being a chameleon, right? And I think I mentioned this in some of my Women in the Red Pill videos. If not, that I might eventually make a final video to that series, or I may not, mentioning this stuff. A woman can totally be anti-feminist for real because she doesn't want to pay taxes, right? She could be anti-feminist for real because she's a traditional conservative woman. She may not give a shit about the right to vote or, the right to have an abortion because she may not believe in doing that anyway. But guess what? She is anti-feminist because she wants to find a traditional man to be a provider and protector. She doesn't give a shit about men. And I'm not talking about Lauren here in particular necessarily, but a traditional conservative woman almost by definition does not care about men other than as a utility. She wants men to be the providers and protectors. But she is anti-feminist because she sees that feminism is ruining that whole process, that men don't want to be part of their traditional roles anymore because of what feminism is doing to drive those men away. So a woman can be definitely anti-feminist if maybe a lot of these women would still say, I want the right to vote or whatnot. So maybe they're still actually first wave feminist or second wave feminist. They're really less radical feminists. But some of these women may actually just not give a crap about that. But they still don't care about men. They don't really respect men. They don't care about men's problems. And so a lot of the men in the manosphere, some of them, sometimes I think have this misconception that, well, if a woman says she's anti-feminist, but then she shits on men, that means she's being a hypocrite. That means she's being a chameleon, and she really wasn't what she said she was, right? Some of the stuff that's come up more recently with Lauren, saying stuff against the men's community did not really surprise me because I never really saw her as being part of the men's community other than in a tangential sense, right? Other than in a tangential way, right? It's not, oh, she actually cares about and is advocating hardcore for men's issues as an MRA. She's just against feminism. A woman could have any of a number of reasons for being against feminism. Only one of those reasons is because she actually cares about men. Now, there are some women that I do think actually want things to be better for men, sometimes because they have sons or fathers that they had close relationships with. Some women tend to be wired to think more like guys, and I do think that they, in some cases, see, well, wait a second, this is fucked up. This is not sustainable, and so men actually need to be treated fairly, or they are going to walk away from this sort of system. But the point that I'm trying to make is that I don't really think that Lauren has ever been one of those women that was anti-feminist because she actually really cared about men's issues. Again, I'm not saying Lauren's a bad person. I don't know how she treats the men in her own life. She may treat them well or she may not, right? What I'm saying is I don't think Lauren has ever been an MRA. I don't think she's ever cared to advocate for that. I don't think she's really concerned with men's issues. And so I'm not saying that Lauren is contradicting herself, and I'm not saying that, she came out as anti-feminist, therefore she's, a chameleon now. I don't really care about any of that. The reason why I wanted to use that clip is because it shows that Lauren should know better, right? Lauren knows that men do have these problems. And this is the main thesis that I want to make for my video, and I do think I'm going to stop this here before I make a part 2. My sort of counter theory or main thesis, whatever you want to call it, is that we do not live in a society that's bounced between men and women, where men and women can just get along, and it's these outliers on both sides that are the problem. That's nonsense. We live in a society that is gynocentric as hell. We live in a society where women have almost all the advantages and men have absolutely legit and valid reasons that are not based on women being evil or hating women or blaming women for all your problems, other than to end the problems by not dealing with most women. We have a society where if you ask a woman to make you a sandwich or get you a beer, that is considered at least somewhat sexist, depending on the context. But expecting a man to be a provider and protector for children that he may not even get to see anymore, that's what a real man does. That is how incredibly one-sided gender roles are. We have a society where domestic violence is typically interpreted as the man's always guilty and the woman's always the victim, whether the evidence says that or not. We have a society where the family law courts allow for domestic violence accusations without any evidence, and it's just assumed to be true if you have a judge that is willing to do that, right? We have a society where, and I'm making this just after recording this video, just after Roe v. Wade basically just got overturned. I can't remember what the name of the new case is. I think Women's Health Organization versus someone. I don't remember. But you know what? Women can still go to a leftist liberal state and have an abortion. That's what they're going to have to do now in some cases. Men have no reproductive rights whatsoever. So, again, all of these things, domestic violence laws, reproductive rights, one-sided gender roles, the family law courts granting, basically assuming that the welfare of the children is the same as the welfare of the woman, giving her all this child support and alimony, basically rewarding her for divorcing her husband. I'm not saying it's going to work out that way in every case, but that's generally how it works out way too often. And so we do not live in a society where men and women just have their issues. And notice at the end of that clip that I inserted here from years ago, one of the other main reasons I wanted to use that is where she says, again, oh, but women have their issues too. Do they? What issues do women have that are the equivalent of being homeless, being more likely to commit suicide, not being allowed to see your own kids, having no benefit in terms of gender roles from being in a relationship with a woman, because women aren't expected to do anything in return for being with a man in that relationship anymore. But yet men are still measured by all the same metrics that they've basically been measured by throughout history and more. How is it exactly that women have issues at that level? Right? And they don't. That's bullshit. That's one of the main points I want to make. And again, I'm going to end this part of the video here. I'm going to wrap that up pretty quickly now, but there is no such parity, or there are no such issues that are the equivalent of being homeless. Lauren even admits that more men get raped than women when you include the prison population. So that part of it doesn't even make sense. What I'm going to assert is that Lauren and Zerse both know this. They know that we live in an incredibly gynocentric culture, but they're going to dance around that because it doesn't lead to the conclusion they want it to lead to, which is that men have far more of a reason to opt out of helping women, to opt out of getting married or having conventional relationships with women. You know, whether a guy still wants to have female friends or not, right? Not every woman's going to treat you like crap, but most of them will, because they can. And the whole gynocentric culture and legal system that we have encourages them to treat men like crap, because everything's always a man's fault. Men can't do anything right, and women are always the victims. That is not a balanced society. And so this whole framework that Lauren tries to create here, that, oh, this is about people on both sides just not wanting to get along with each other because we're going to assume that we have this balanced system in place, it all falls apart once you realize that that assumption is incorrect. When you actually have a gynocentric culture that basically systemically discriminates against men, that whole idea doesn't hold up. I'm going to continue this in the other part of the video.